All right, here we go. Take one.
Because people see right through us. They see right through the fancy clothes. They see through all your highlighted Bible verses. But what they need to see today is that you're a real person dealing with real emotion, dealing with real problems, that is searching for a real God today. Because we all need hope. Perfect people scare me. I can't relate to you.
Faith is something that we all struggle with, whether it be faith in your child, your boss, or even faith that we will live until tomorrow. You know, faith is believing in something that we do not truly understand, such as motives, agendas, or anything that we can't judge through our senses. What we see can even be altered, requiring a certain amount of faith to believe that it's real. Faith in my judgment or even my feelings, since they really are not always accurate. I question many things, which has helped me in a lot of different occasions, but probably has also harmed me at times. I think outside the box, which has allowed my creativity to offer new possibilities and has opened the door in me helping people at times. I'm a skeptic by nature, but I have to be careful in judging things without allowing other possibilities. So let me explain real quick. If I look into something, whether it be a person, a place, a situation, or a problem with a skeptical mind, and I'm only looking for the problems in it and not being open to any strengths, then my mind is already made up for it to fail. For a lot of years of my life, I worked hard to find everything I could to prove the non-existence of God. Now, with that mindset, and I see this with many atheists who attempt to do this, already have their mind set, since they aren't even leaving the door cracked for the existence of God. Now, stay tuned, as I have a very special guest who I believe has fallen into that same trap, but eventually opened his mind to the possibilities that he could have been wrong. I'll return in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Trapped in a dream, a cave nightmare, taunted by lies, climbing Everest without a rope.
My name's Eric McCoy, and let's get high. Today's episode is going to be a little unique because I'm going to begin this by speaking briefly about a topic that I don't normally discuss in detail, something that's a little personal to me, and this is because of my guest today. Now, before everybody runs, as I mentioned the word God, open your minds and just listen to the message as. And honestly, one thing that we can't dispute, if you believe in it or not, that the Bible is probably by far the most inspirational book ever written. Now, I've read the entire Bible a couple of times, and I actually really studied it, mostly because I had a lot of time on my hands while sitting in custody. And I actually honestly even considered at one point to become a pastor because of what I saw within that book. Was my story that was being told. Whether you like it or not, many of the principles and tools that guide us in recovery are within that. And the first being humility. Humility is what will save us in this world. It says in the Bible, Jesus Christ came for the sinners and not the righteous. Humility, and it's a story of strength. Certain things sort of stuck out to me within the Bible. And one was actually 1 Corinthians, and it said, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind." And then it kind of continues on, and it says, "When you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." Methamphetamine was my drug of choice. And I actually gave it a name that is a biblical name, even before I believed in the message of that ancient book, the devil. And it was a temptation, but at the same time is a temptation that is common to all mankind, especially today. That temptation, even though it felt that there was power that was greater than I could bear, but I had a way out. Now, I also can't dispute that for the first time in my life, when I found a way out was when I made a statement and then I asked a question with the help of a priest that was in jail. God, I don't believe in you, but if you are there, help me find you. I believe that my atheistic view in life probably stemmed from my lack of interest in believing a power that was going to condemn me to an eternity of something ugly because of my dependency on drugs, which I felt I had no way out. As I read that book, it dawned on me that every character from Adam and Eve in the Old Testament with the first sin to Paul in the New Testament had probably asked that same question that we all ask at times. Where is this loving God that's supposed to care for me? How am I supposed to live this godly life? And there is no way that I'm going to walk through those pearly gates with the things that I've done, or even the thoughts that run through my mind at times. If anybody's curious on what the Bible says about that, maybe you should read it. Why do bad things happen to good people? And there are answers within that text. The book I wrote, Pain, Failure, and Misery Are the Stepping Stones to Success, even though I didn't create this book based on this quote, but Psalms 119, verse 71 says, it was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. I also want to mention something really quick for all the Christians out there who believe that it is the devil that causes bad things to happen. But Isaiah 45:7 says, form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all things. But I thought about that. And honestly, the greatest advocates out there fighting for the good of mankind had to suffer to spread their message of love. The faith of Christianity is not a story that was written of hopes and dreams with the mindset for a lot of people of wanting to live forever, this fear of death, that eternity is a place of nothingness, because I would have created a very different story. I realized that after really studying it, that this is a story that requires strength, courage, and probably a much tougher life compared to the atheistic view. A story of Paul, who in our definition today was a serial killer of Christians, that eventually changed his mind. And then he suffered for a lot of years because of his faith. So I guess, honestly, I'm probably stating that these are people stronger than those who don't believe in God. I also came to realize that everybody has doubts at times. And as I mentioned in the podcast before with Joe Potosi, that faith is just not giving up. My guest today, Anthony Torres, has, I think, a lot of similarities to me and probably a lot of our listeners out there. He battled with drug addiction. He suffered those same questions, I believe, of our existence and walked away with a lot of scars. And then he became a man of faith. He's an author of a new book, Letters to My People, Thoughts of a Recovering Addict. And he is also the lead pastor of Mountain View Church in New Mexico, which is why I sort of introduced this way. Anthony, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I obviously want to talk about your book, but I also have some questions about faith as well, if you're up to it.
Sure. Yeah.
And as I like to end our podcast with the powerful message of hope, I'd like to actually begin with your stories of struggles in your life. And so tell me a little bit about what you went through, through your issues.
Well, I'm very glad that you opened up a podcast like that, and saying the things that you said. I wrote some notes here. Actually, you're actually giving me a sermon already here in a couple of weeks. It's just some of the things you were saying. But you said the Bible is inspirational. I really love that. because I wrote here in my notes also, and it's also changing. It can also change us. I mean, my story is very long, so I want to kind of really get this in the next 3 to 5 minutes. But I grew up in a Catholic home. And so I was an altar boy for 3 years, made my first Holy Communion, all that stuff that you do in the Catholic Church. And I would say probably in my teenage years is when I started to shy away from the faith. My grandma and grandpa were killed by a drunk driver. My parents went through a very ugly divorce. And so I'm originally from Oklahoma, but we actually moved to New Mexico once my parents got that divorce. But I remember being in the Catholic Church, and I always heard them say, well, just pray, just pray, just pray. But I never really understood what that meant. And then when my prayer did get answered, I assumed that maybe that God just didn't want to hear my prayer. And so I shied away from the Catholic faith. I don't want to say that I was an atheist. I was kind of leaning more towards an agnostic. Like I had my own thoughts about God and kind of what you said, why do bad things happen, to good people? And so that's kind of where my faith was at that point. Obviously, experimenting with drugs and alcohol just didn't make things any better. And I love how you said, a lot of the bad things that happen, we, tend to blame it on the devil. I think somewhere as Christians, we got to get away from that. Now, we know who the devil is and what he's known for, but he doesn't control us. I mean, those seeds can be planted, and we're the ones that open those doors, And so, I lived my whole life blaming people and blaming God for why I was in the position that I was in. If that makes any sense. Well, I'm this way because if my parents wouldn't have divorced, then maybe I would have a father and a mother. Well, I'm this way because my grandma and grandpa are not here. Well, I'm this way and I'm this way because of this and that. And I spent my whole life like that, blaming other people and blaming other things instead of in the end, looking at my own self. So long story short, I had gotten out of rehab in 2009 of August, was only there for about 11 days. Ended up going back home to Oklahoma to where, again, all my family's at. I know that night that I had planned suicide. I've been depressed, suicidal, the things that life brings that just throws at you. I was dealing with so much. And that night I was going to kill myself, but I ended up drinking myself to black out. Woke up the next morning. My aunt said, "Do you want to go to church?" I said, "No way. I don't like Christians. I don't like church. I don't even know if I like God. This is not for me." But I tell you what, God had my number that morning. And he spoke to me through a pastor that I just can't explain. It was a spiritual experience. It wasn't an Apostle Paul type experience, but it was really an experience with God. Not everything went away. I mean, I still relapsed for 4 months, church, relapse, church, relapse. But there was in that time that I said, you know what? I'm in this mess because of me, because the doors that I opened, the decisions that I made has nothing to do with my parents, has not even nothing to do with God. Knowing that my grandma and grandpa died, not because of God, because of somebody else's sin. The guy chose to get behind the wheel and drink and drive. God didn't make that happen. That was that guy's choice. So my grandparents were the consequences of somebody else's sin. So, here we are now, 11 years, clean and sober and pastoring a church. And who would have thought that I'd be pastoring a church? I mean, like seriously, like where I've come from. So God he spoke to my heart to write a book, to get my story out there. And here's the thing, it was 10 years in the writing. I mean, I've been writing that book for a long, long time. I didn't want to write it to be preachy. I didn't. If anybody knows me, that's not my personality, just to preach to you. Because listen, when I was without God, I didn't want people preaching to me. How many times would I tell people, take your God somewhere else? I'm still a mess. We're all a mess somewhere, right? Somewhere we're all a mess. So, Letters to My People. It's a book about my journey. It's not preachy. As a matter of fact, I start the book off like that. How you kind of started the podcast off, like, listen, this is just my faith. And yes, I'm a believer in Jesus. And I even put in the book, don't close the book. For some reason, when people hear Jesus, people are like, oh, just another religious book. But it's not like that at all. I do share where I have come from. And basically, it's an autobiography, but how everybody and everything was affected by me, by my addiction. And so I think when people pick it up, they think that I talk about, the club days, the days that I was working at my job, just things like that. But it's more of internally how I dealt with things and how everybody around me was affected by it.
It's interesting. I literally did. I thought about becoming a pastor at some point in time because, I work in the substance abuse field. It's frustrating, obviously, at times. And I started to think that, if I do this, I am such a hypocrite. That's sort of the way I felt, it's like, me standing up there and preaching whatever. You live a certain life and you do certain things. And I did a lot of bad things, that are kind of described in the book I wrote. Committing residential burglaries. I mean, lots of bad things that I did. Stole lots of money from lots of people. And that's kind of what I felt. It was like, how am I going to get up here and like, preach this God and that kind of stuff, when I lived this life? Did you feel that way at all?
You know what? No, I didn't, because I knew that my sins and everything that I have done was forgiven. I understood that what came with being a pastor, that my life was going to be under the microscope. And so I don't want to say I negotiated with God, because even though people in the Bible did negotiate with God sometimes, but, it was a calling that was so heavy on my life that I ran from it for a good 7-8 months. I'm like, God, I don't want to do this. Like, you pick somebody else to do it, somebody that grew up in the church, like not me. And it was almost like God, every time I would say that, God would open a door for me to speak somewhere. And I embraced the calling, started going to seminar. And then next thing I was an associate pastor in Dallas, Texas, moved out here to New Mexico, took my first lead pastor position. But I told God, I said, listen, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I never want to forget where I've come from. And I'm always going to be transparent with the people. I mean, my church will tell you today, I'm very transparent. Listen, if I've had a bad day, I've had a bad day. That's just all there is to it. I'm not afraid to get up there in that pulpit and say, hey, you know what? I need you to pray for me because I had a very hard week. I've also admitted that I suffer from mild depression. My church knows about that, and I don't know if that's a thorn in my side that Paul had. I just don't know. I mean, I've studied depression, I've lived depression. It's not how it used to be, but that's shunned in the church. I mean, you even having a pastor admit depression, they're like, oh, well, I just guess you're not as holy as you say you are. Well, no, I'm not holy, but he's holy, right? And so, I mean, I always want to make sure that however I am down from the pulpit, that's also what they see on the pulpit. I'm mirroring both, and just being transparent. And again, I think if you were to speak to anybody in our church, they would say, yeah, Pastor and Sasha, which is my wife, Sasha, they are very transparent. They're people just like us. They're people just like us that need God, that need faith, and need to grow every day in their faith. So
that's like I said with, in the beginning, that he came for the sinners, not the righteous, which I think fits right in there. I look at, especially today, a lot of Christians out there that have this righteousness, lots of judgment, judging everybody. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you see a lot of that?
Oh, yeah, I see a lot of that even within our church. I think it's everywhere you go. We're trying to do our best to create a different culture here in the city. And maybe that's why God called me to this position, because I understand I came from that, and so there's one church in town, that I don't want to say they mock me or mock the church, but they call us the loving church. Well, if you need more love, then go to that church, because we are a church that we accept everybody here. I don't care if they're blue, black, where they come from and their background. Like, we want them here because, see, here's the thing that I understand. I can't change nobody. You can't change nobody. But God, he can change anybody he wants to. Yeah, the Bible is very inspirational, but I think it's it's changing as well. It can change anybody if they're willing, I guess you can say, but yeah,
Got to have that open mind, you know.
yeah. But I mean, I see it all the time in the church. I mean, people in the church even judge me, but I mean, it is what it is. That was like that in the Bible days. It's like that here now. But all we can do is be our best to represent Christ the best way that we can.
Something I really struggled with a lot was, I talked to a lot of pastors, this was back even during my drug days, lots of pastors. I went through the 12-step program for the first time when I was 16 years old. So I knew about all the spiritual aspects, the God, and those things. And I always had this thought. I was like, why can all of these people, and I always felt like this blind faith, why can't I have it? And then and then you kind of hear within the Bible that where does faith come from? Faith comes from God. Well, why isn't God giving it to me?
Right.
And that's the way I felt,
Right.
Let me ask you a question. For a lot of people, and I've had responses from, different people, especially on Facebook and stuff, that the only way to do this is through God. Okay. The only way to get sober is through God. Okay. Now we can sit here and say, okay, that's true. But what do you say to those people that don't believe in God? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, you got to have God in your life. And if they don't have it, how do you get those people to maybe look at that? This is kind of the question that I've been asking for a long time. Is how do you reach those people? If you want to say God is the way, this is how you're going to get it, but then this person doesn't believe in God, what does that look like?
Well, I think with a life of addictions, there's a lot of things that come with it. We're not talking months of internally damaging ourselves physically and spiritually, but it affects everybody around us. When we become clean and sober, there's now a time in our life that we need to start healing in our lives, forgiving ourselves, number one, maybe asking for forgiveness from others. A lot of damage inside of us spiritually, that maybe doors that we've opened, things that we saw. And so there's a lot of healing aspect when it comes to getting sober and clean. My favorite saying is that if we don't heal properly, Christian or non-Christian, we're going to bleed on everybody that loves us. There's a proper way of healing from life. We're really good at masking it with a lot of things in the world. Those that are in addiction understand that. But I always like to tell people is that if you don't believe in God, that's fine. But there's some healing in your life that needs to take place. And I believe that God is the only one that can heal those areas in our life. I mean, I'm 11 years clean and sober, but I'm still healing today from things that in 2008, 2009. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. I look at my children now, my daughter, which I talk about it in my book, she suffers from PTSD. If me and my wife have a disagreement, she's like, okay, now tell you guys you love each other, because her fear is that I'm going to leave and walk out the door and never come back, because that's all she saw when she was growing up. So she has that PTSD. And I talk about that in my book. I can't remember what letter, but it's called PTSD Child. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to take place. The Bible is full of not just healing physically, but healing spiritually. I think about Paul. I think about how many people he killed, how many Christians he killed. But yeah, he needed some healing in his life. We all need healing. And listen, you can go shopping, they ain't going to heal you. You can try to do your best to read so many books on healing. It's not going to heal you. I believe that God is the only one that can heal us. I'm talking about internally, and physically, but if that's his will, but spiritually inside. Because let me tell you what, when you go through a life of addiction, you're broken, man. I mean, you're just broken, you're shattered, and there's some things that need to be healed. And I'm glad that you said that, because we actually right now are trying to get a recovery center going here in Alamogordo. There's really nothing for nobody. There's no detox. There's no good recovery center. And even though it's going to be faith-based, it's open to everybody. I mean, we're not saying you have to be a Christian to come into this program. We want it to be for everybody. So, but that's what I would say. There is a healing aspect that comes with getting sober and clean.
I thought for a long time that my heart was hardened. That's kind of the way I'd felt for a long time, was like, this finding this thing it's not going to happen, but it did. I did sort of had some, miraculous things, when I was in custody. And I think that really probably, and it wasn't, again, like you were saying, like this bright light and, but it was more of, after I made that prayer, for the first time in my life, I had interest in studying it. And I think that was probably the greatest, thing that first took place, was just all of a sudden I was interested. And I like what you said also, that, you are, you're a church that welcomes everybody, and I mean, we have, there's a lot of places out there that don't accept everybody, gays, lesbians, and those people that are usually damned by the church.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody's welcome here. Matter of fact, I baptized a lesbian about a couple of years ago, because my job as a pastor is not to judge you. My job as a pastor is to help you get closer to God. That's it. I have no authority to judge you. And then people that are Christians will say, well, Paul talked about that we were to judge in the church. Do I make corrections that need to be corrected? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not my place to play God. It's not my place to say, well, you have 3 years to be this way, or we're going to remove you from the church. No, I mean, the thing is that, again, my job is to help people to get closer to God. Gay, lesbians, transgender, that's my job, is to help them to get closer to God, And so I've seen too many things happen in church where, people they shun them from the church. And I'm like, first of all, we need to be happy that they're coming to church. We need to be happy that they're sitting in a chair to hear the word of God. Why would we shun them away? And again, as a pastor, I've gotten a lot of flack from people within the community because of that, church leaders, but hey, it is what it is. I mean, we're on a different mission here at Mountain View Church in reaching the lost. Our saying is reach one, not reach one when we feel like it, not reach one if they look like us. No, we're talking about reach one. So yeah, we do. Like I said, when we say we're a church for everybody, we're a church for everybody. And here's the thing. When we have lesbians and gays that come to the church, I have conversations with them. I said, listen, this is where I stand as a pastor. This is what the word says, but it doesn't change my love for you. And they understand that. I can still hold tight to my convictions, but I can also still let loose of my compassion, be compassionate and love them just right where they're at, So yeah, we do let gays and lesbians be a part of the fellowship here at Mountain View Church. Now, again, they can't teach or, anything like that, but they're welcome to help greet and stuff like that here at the church. So, but yeah, we do have a place.
Yeah, Jesus said, thou shalt not judge, and that you will be judged the same way that you judge here. And I remember reading that, and I was like, that's pretty black and white to me.
Pretty black and white, right?
You'd think, right?
Yeah.
So no, I'm really, I think this is powerful, and I'm really glad that you came on here, because I think this is such a powerful message, that you can live that life, and go through the drug dependency or the drug issues and the things that you went through, and you are able to step up and out of it, and you are able to do good things. I mean, this is where, I talk about this all the time, and that, I was dragged through the depths of hell with my addiction. And, at some point in time, I was able to stand up and with my head held high, and I am working to do good things, whether I'm doing it or not. But that's what I'm trying to do, is to do good things, and to at least send a message of hope out there, and and I know you understand this high walk clean. I know you get it. I guarantee you get up there and you're teaching and preaching and you're getting high doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's a different kind of rush. It's a different kind of it's a spiritual, high, I guess you can say. It fuels me every day, and why I do what I do. Again, I never thought that I'd be pastoring a church. I mean, come on. But here's the thing. I've heard a lot of testimonies from people. We had this one guy that was coming to the church years ago, and he said, "You know what? This was my last church." He's, "I'm not gonna lie, I've been to church after church," and he's like, "They shunned me." I mean, he had a tattoo on his neck, full of tattoo, the one on his eyelid. And he says, "And I looked at you and I was like, you're the pastor of the church?" He said, "Not in a bad way." He said, "But I looked at you all full of tattoos." I'm like, if your church can love you, they can love me. That's what he said.
Where do these churches stand with that, though? I mean, people want to come in and then they just kick them out. I don't, or how does that really work? I don't really quite understand that.
They try to justify it with scripture. Paul talks about, not to be in association with any sinners. Christians are notorious. Come on. They're notorious for picking and choosing scriptures that they want to hold tight to and then use it to bash other people. I've seen it, but here's the thing is, I know that I'm on an assignment from God. That's the bottom line. I should have been dead a long time ago, dead. But God, revealed himself to me, because, I mean, you talk about a darkened, hardened heart. I had one. I mean, I don't know how many times my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but she would try to share some scripture with me. I'm like, no. I don't want to hear anything about God. Or how many times a Christian would bump into me and go, "Do you know Jesus?" And I'm like, "You need to leave me alone." But my heart was hardened. But, here I am having the second chance in life. And what am I going to do with it? I'm on assignment. I'm on a different assignment, than, I don't want to say any other church, but I just believe we're different in reaching people, and so we're a very outreach driven church. We do a lot of street ministry, always on the streets, feeding people, clothing people. I say it every Sunday. I don't want to be a church that takes. I want to be a church that gives. It gives back to the community, and so we're very, very heavy outreach driven in this city. So, but that's what I'm doing with my second chance in life.
That's fantastic, man. It's sad. To me, it's really been sad lately, with my brother, for instance. I remember him saying, my younger brother, he was saying, with everything, with all the evangelical Christians, just, I don't know, just doing crazy things. He kind of got to this place where he's like, I can't even believe it anymore. I can't believe in it anymore, But I thought, something I've always told people is, people say, why do bad things happen? Why do horrible things happen? Is that God doing those? Or these are people that are making choices, to do things. We always say, we have free will. We have the ability to make choices. People can take guns and they can go in and they can shoot people at free will. I don't know what people are expecting, like some big lightning is supposed to come out of the sky, knock the person down. But yeah, there's, as far as there's been kind of a lot of sad things that have been happening,
I just hold on to what Paul said. Our citizenship's our citizenship is in heaven. You're going to take this journey one day. I'm going to take this journey one day. We don't know when we're going to take this journey to go to heaven. But that's what Paul says. Your citizenship is in heaven. And so I prayed, over many people that are about to pass away. A lot of things that I see, sometimes I don't even understand. But what I don't understand doesn't make me look at God any different, because what I do understand keeps me going. That's his love, grace, mercy, forgiveness that he has for me today. Knowing that without him, I'm nothing. Knowing without him, I'm that guy again. You know what I mean? So, I mean, for any pastor to say, well, to give you a solid answer on something can be really hard, because even pastors don't know it all. We don't know it all, but God knows it all. So we just got to trust him. And it's hard. Suffering's hard, isn't it? It's so
Absolutely.
hard suffering. When you see somebody you love just suffer, but don't forget Jesus suffered too. And that's one of the things we have to think about. Jesus suffered too,
A lot
so
worse than we will.
yeah, if you ever do some studying and how he suffered, they say that no man would be able to withstand what he went through. They think that the theologians think that there was a point in time in his body that it just went numb. He couldn't feel anymore. He had given all his pain. That's powerful, you know.
What are your typical sermons like? What do you typically preach? Well, not preach. We'll say.
I'm a weekend to weekend type guy. What I mean by that is a lot of pastors, there's nothing wrong with this, but a lot of pastors, they have their whole sermons planned out for the year, and not to get nothing wrong with that, but I'm a weekend to weekend type guy. I'm like, Lord, what do you want this weekend for your people? What do you want them to learn? Um, uh, I just this past Sunday, I just talked about serving. What does it mean to have a servant's heart? God's been really dealing with my heart all week about teaching his people to pray. Something so simple, but yet we don't do it. And I'm a weekend to weekend type guy. It's whatever I'm feeling the needs are in the church, what people are going through right now. It's the balance of many things. By the way, if you want to go catch a sermon, you just go to mbcalamo.com. Sermons are there. Follow me on Anthony Torres. I have little snippets of sermons that I do on Facebook. But many people describe me as like an evangelist type preacher, I guess you can say. And so I mean, if that's the way people see me, that's what they see me. It's not a bad thing. I mean, but like I've met pastors, man, that they get up there and they're just so smart. You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, they're so smart, and I don't consider myself a smart guy. I just consider me a person that's obedient to God, and just whatever he wants me to do, I do. So I don't know. I guess it's a hard question to ask. I guess you'd have to go listen to the sermons, I guess you can say.
Yeah. I remember, again, when I was sort of really studying the Bible, and I really kind of came across some different stuff. I had actually put together this presentation that I was actually going to do at a church on substance abuse. And part of the big question is, like, how do we reach the unreachable? And it's something that I've always really tried to figure out ways that we can do this, And so I put this presentation together. Then COVID came along, so I never actually was able to do it because nobody wanted to go to church. But I, some of the stuff that I really thought about, and I remember this. So, with one of them being, Philippians, right? I remember it's like, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is
meditate on
right.
these things.
If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things, right? And some of the stuff that I teach in treatment and stuff, I don't obviously teach the Bible or anything like that, but some of the messages, like Paul does not tell them what to think, but instead for them to think for themselves.
Yeah.
Think about such things, and I think the real power that we gain is once we can think for ourselves, not through the minds of others.
Yeah.
And I think this is where it really means something, as a pastor, I can kind of just imagine, you are an inspiring person, that you probably work to build people up,
Hmm.
That's kind of the way. I haven't seen any of yours, but that's kind of the vibe that I would get from you.
Thanks.
um,
Yeah.
and but it is, the Bible definitely has a lot to do with, the verses in there that have to do with truth and trust. You know, um, you know, any lie or a misperception of a lie will disconnect the ability for people to work with them. And I kind of almost imagine that you being that very honest individual, just like you were saying. And I appreciate, I'm depressed, and for you to acknowledge those things, that's admirable, especially
Yeah.
for
Well,
a pastor.
I tell people all the time, what you see is what you get. I'm not here to put on the show for anybody. I'm just here to live my life the best way that I can with my family, sober and clean. Um, Now on this assignment that he has for me, because one of these days I'm not going to be here anymore. And whenever God sees it that it's my time to go home, I go home. But I want to know that I at least try to make some kind of impact somewhere, not just with my family, but where he has me at, I guess you can say.
Yeah, and I think from a, like a biblical standpoint too, like empathy, empathy is, I think the foundation to building rapport. And honestly, the only way that you can really reach someone. And I think that's another thing that I really get a vibe from you, is that you have that empathy, that desire to understand people. And I think that's powerful, for you to open up your doors to anybody, and that's, I really appreciate, because I always had that image in my life that, yeah, pastors are perfect.
Hmm.
You don't have flaws. One thing I always like to ask everybody, that I think is a really important question, is if you were to reach out and to speak to those out there suffering, that are struggling, what would you tell them?
Hold on. Hold on. Just hold on.
Yeah.
I've dealt with, a long time ago, those suicidal thoughts and struggling. And well, if this life has to offer, then I don't want it. But they just have to hold on. They have to believe that there's something bigger than them. They have to believe.
Well, and as drug abusers and drug dependency, they do at some point in time feel that there is something more powerful than them, which becomes that drug. So they got to
Right.
understand that in that context, and obviously, hopefully, yeah, when they get away from that, that they're able to find something,
Yeah.
and I mean, and I, like I said, I had messages of people, that were like, "Oh, God's the only way," God, kind of thing, and. But the truth being is that, and I think I kind of see this within you a little bit, is that all you can do is open the door. And, for me to, even if I have that strong belief that God is the only way that you're going to do this, right? You'll never find any other way. It has to be God. Well, the last thing that I want to do is to force God down somebody's throat when they're at a place to where they're not going to accept it, because that's going to push them away even further.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many times did people always tell me that God was the only way, that the only way I was gonna, get rid of this, all the things I was dealing with God, 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 God. But my heart was so hardened. God himself can be knocking on my forehead and I wouldn't even know it. I had to come to the end of myself, physically and spiritually and mentally. I mean, it was a day that the pastor looked at me. He said, "What can I pray with you about?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Have you ever accepted Jesus into your life?" I said, "Am I supposed to? I don't know this stuff." And he said, "Close your eyes." So I closed my eyes. He said, "I want you to say this prayer with me." And for once in my life, my lips confessed that Jesus was Lord and my heart was open. And it was like a flood of emotions. And I mean, spiritually, you can just feel it. God was like, "I'm here. Stop running from me." I forgive you for everything that you've done. And there I am, weeping like a baby. Like, is this real? Like, what's happening to me? So, I'm not the preachy type. Christians and even churches have got a bad rep over the years. I just want to help people. I just want to reach people. I share my faith with people. People listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. But even sometimes I have people that are from the streets that don't even go to church, don't even believe in God, but they want to hear what I have to say. And I say, I'm a pastor, right? Like, I'm a Christian, right? Like, I'm going to share what I've been through. And they're like, that's fine. They just want to hear, and maybe something will ignite in their heart, And so, but the Christians are notorious. They're very notorious for wanting to shove Jesus down people's throats. And I mean, if you ever study the teachings in the life of Jesus, he went and he spoke wherever he can speak. And some cities he wasn't wanted in, and some cities, he was pushed out of and would throw stones at him. But whoever would listen, would listen. And this is what I always tell people. I don't know how much time we have left, but you really want to get somebody curious about your relationship with God, be the example. Just be the example. What did Gandhi say? I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but he said, "Your Christians, your Christ I like, but not your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." That's what Gandhi said.
And I think that's one of the greatest messages out there is to act as if, to be the person that, is admirable, to be that person that people can look at and say, man, I wish I could be like that, to have that calm nature, to be able to talk about things and to discuss things without screaming and yelling.
Yeah. I mean, we don't always get it right. We're still working on ourselves, absolutely. Right? But,
trust
throw
me.
a water bottle at somebody.
Yeah. I think I want to mention something really quick. Another thing I thought about as we're talking about this, but when we look at the concept of life's not fair, right? How many people say that life is not fair? Yeah. And Jesus is the greatest example of life not fair, right? He took upon himself the punishment that we deserved, right? And God teaches us that an act of something may not seem fair, but will have a purpose beyond our understanding. Even though with him, we obviously do have the understanding, but he didn't deserve it. Right?
Well, listen, life's never going to be fair. It's never going to be fair. Life is what we make of it. That's just the bottom line that it comes down to. And I talk a lot about that in my book. If you're going to be negative, your recovery is going to be negative. You got to get to a place where you're just positive, where you're speaking life into your recovery, because people that are in recovery that are trying to get sober and clean, it's literally starting from all over again. It's starting from scratch, and so again, I wish everything went away from me overnight, but it didn't. 4 months of being in church and then back on drugs again, that was hard, relapsing all the time. I felt like I was never going to get through this, but slowly picking up the pieces to my life, and here we are, 11 years later, still, healing, still learning, still recovering, I guess you can say. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything you want to say real quick that we haven't discussed?
I would just encourage people, if they felt led, to read Letters to My People, Thoughts of Recovering Addict. It's not just for those in addiction or those that are in recovery. It's been out for 2 months now, and I've gotten a lot of messages from even mothers saying, hey, like, my son's in jail and I've never dealt with any kind of addiction, but I wanted to know what my son was going through. And your book really opened a lot of, it answered a lot of questions, is what she said. It answered a lot of questions. I was able to understand my son better. And so again, the book, I believe, is for everybody. It's a read for everybody, addict or non-addict, even Christian and non-Christian. That's the way I wanted to write it. I didn't want it to be just another, Christian author writing another Christian book. I wanted it to help people, Christian or non-Christian. And so it is a book for everybody. But I do want to thank you for having me on your podcast. Like, this is my first podcast interview. Like, I'm excited. Like, I mean, I've never done this before. You know, you always, see it on, all the time, people doing podcast interviews, but this is my first one. And so thank you. I'm excited. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate it. And I'll post up where they can locate your book. And obviously, if anybody's in New Mexico, check out his church, Mountain View Church, right? In New Mexico.
Yeah, my pastor said once, he had very wise words. He said, be careful who you give a microphone to. That's what he said. And so here you are taking a chance on me because you're like, I don't even know this guy. I'm going to give him a microphone. But we're recording now. I mean, you can delete stuff that you need to delete out. But still, I mean, thank you for trusting me just to be on here. And my wife, Sasha Torres, she's one of my big supporters and love her so much. Been together for 20 years, 4 kids, 3 wonderful daughters and a son, Caleb. But thank you for allowing me to be on your show.
Absolutely.
Kind sir.
I appreciate it. Hey, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of High While Clean. As I always keep saying, keep getting high. Let's do it.